Hello and welcome to Brokenomics. And in this episode, I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking to Jeff Booth. Jeff Booth is a tech entrepreneur and he is an author. He wrote a book called Price of Tomorrow, which I consider to be one of the most important books that you can read. It is a book that fundamentally changed the lenses of which I view the world. And actually, when I started Brokenomics, I said to Carl that there was a few characters that I really wanted to get on, and I gave him a short list of people that I wanted to speak to, and Jeff was at the top of that list. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Jeff to the show. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, my pleasure, Dan.
Yeah. Do you want to tell our audience just a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background?
Probably the easiest. I'm an entrepreneur. I build companies through the internet wave. Mm-hmm. One of those reached about 500 million in value over time. And then I saw what was happening in technology, how fast technology was moving. And I decided to write a book called The Price of Tomorrow, Why Deflation is Key to an Abundant Future. Mm. And today I invest in companies on top of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I see it as a transition from a system that we live in now to a new system that brings better, essentially brings truth, hope, and abundance to humanity. That's going to sound really difficult to understand right now before going into the thesis, but that's why I'm spending my time there.
One slight anecdote that I think you gave me, although and this was at the conference where we met, although we were about 8 beers in at that point, so I could be misremembering this. But did you tell me that when you were running Build Direct that you got the chance to meet Justin Trudeau?
Yeah,
is that correct? Is he smarter in person than he comes across on camera? Because on screen he appears to be this complete himbo. I mean, but he's risen to the rank of Prime Minister. There must be something going on.
Yeah, you never know. And what I would say is I spent time with him too, and I knew his entire team, and I know how the entire political structure works. I know how not just political. I know how the technology structure works. I know how power concentrates and what it does. As a result of this, he and his team had my book before it was published. In fact, it was partially the central bankers prior to, with him, that in a very private meeting, I asked the question. I laid out my thesis, and the central bankers said, "What would you have us do?" When I realized, oh my God, my kids are going to grow up in a really dystopian world unless I write this book. That people don't understand how big a deal this is, and when elected and otherwise officials that are supposed to be looking after things have no clue about what's happening, and I would ask that question in a very private room where they could actually answer honestly, you realize, oh, we're in a lot of trouble.
So that was absolutely going to be one of the questions I'm going to come to later is to the extent to which central bankers and senior politicians understand the danger of this. But we might be in danger of putting the horse before the cart. Do you want to lay out the central thesis of the book?
Yeah, the central thesis of the book is technology. Technology increases productivity, and prices should fall in a free market. And added to that, technology is moving exponentially because of Moore's law. And so prices should be falling exponentially. Your time should be getting more and more. You should be working less and getting more every year. Didn't
Keynes say that at this point we should be working 15 hours a week?
Yeah, about 10 hours a week right now. Okay. And that was written 1923 in the economic possibilities for our grandchildren. And that was in 2020. So if you fast forward that to today, it should be about 5 hours a week. Because remember, it's an exponential pattern and humans don't understand exponential patterns very well.
Keynes was talking about a different time where we had something much closer to a hard money system. And of course, that's not the mechanism that we work on today.
Yeah. So remember, Keynes is partially responsible for the mechanism we have today. And a whole bunch of ideas in his glory have been essentially misconstruing that human nature wouldn't co-opt a financial system.
Do you believe that if we had remained on the gold standard, that it might actually be the case that the average man was working?
No, because gold wouldn't have solved the problem, because you go to war over gold. And you revalue gold because it centralizes. So either somebody comes in and steals that gold from you, or it centralizes, and the government on top of that rewrites the rules on gold, like the U.S. did in the 30s. Okay. And so because of that centralization, now hard money is different. Hard money, but the world needs a neutral reserve currency that can float with different nations getting more competitive, less competitive, that cannot be manipulated. And if you look through the entire lens of human history, if a money could be manipulated for some humans' gains over other humans' gains or their losses, it will be. Not it might be, it will be. And so gold was a really great effort. It slowed down what we're talking about, but in time it always got co-opted.
But surely with fiat money, it really accelerates this process. So what happens if this fiat money system that we have now and the political structure that we have now, what happens if this is just allowed to run?
Well, that's what I explored in the book, right? And all the second, third, fourth order derivatives of this conversation. So to make it easy for an audience who hasn't understood or hasn't looked at the book, if you say in economics, prices fall to the marginal cost of production. That is a law in economics. It always happens. And you can regulate an industry for a while to slow that down. But that regulated industry is then attacked from somewhere else that doesn't regulate that industry, and prices continue to fall. And then your industry is attacked from somewhere else. So over a long term, prices always fall to the marginal cost of production. It is why the calculator app on your phone is free. It is why that your photos are free today. It's why this video, what we're doing right now, is free today and can touch millions of people where it couldn't before. Because when there's a penny of profit, entrepreneurs will try to attack it until there's no more profit. And then they'll go to the next industry where there is profit. And so prices always fall to the marginal cost of production. Now, that's super important. So you can't move on to something else before you answer that. And that is a true statement. The next statement, we have exponentially moving technology. So prices should be falling exponentially so fast to the marginal cost of production, we wouldn't even be able to understand it. So those two things are factual, true. There's no one has ever argued with me on those two things or debated me with any. Now,
and this won't just be classic technology items, will it? It won't just be your phone, because mobile phones obviously have gone through this process, laptops and other electrical equipment. This will be agriculture. It will be everything.
Technology is everywhere. It's in energy. We use technology in energy. We use technology everywhere. The problem is, so I'll finish this statement first. So that means just those two statements alone mean prices should be falling exponentially everywhere. But we live in a debt-based system, and that debt-based system is making up monetary units out of thin air at the exact corresponding exponential rate. So prices should be falling that on one axis, and you have to manipulate money globally at a higher rate than that to be able to essentially pretend $400 trillion of insolvent debt is solvent. So what you're doing as a result of that is you're pushing up prices on fewer and fewer things. Because remember, the calculator app I talked about, the video that we're on right now, the photos that you're talking about, where are they in GDP?
Yeah.
They're free. They're not in GDP anymore.
So I used to take photos, take them to be developed, and I spent money for all of that, and now I don't pay a penny for all of that, but I'm better off. But from a GDP perspective, it looks like the economy is shrinking.
Exactly. But if the economy shrinks, the $400 trillion of debt becomes insolvent like that. And every bank fails. You would go to your grocery store, the supply chain feeding it would fail. No. It would be empty shelves. It would be dystopian overnight. So you can't allow a deflationary spiral. So governments are trying to inflate to stop that. Essentially, they're trying to make your currency worth less by making up more units of currency to be able to stop that.
We've always had that rate of technological increase. And obviously there was a step change around, say, the digitization of information with the internet. But it feels like we are entering another step change with robotics and AI and a number of other convergent technologies. Kathy Wood talks about this all the time, about the big ideas of the things that are coming forward. It feels like that rate of technological improvement is increasing sharply at this point.
It's not. It feels like it is. It's been, and I say this quite often. If you've read my book, so it lays out exactly where we are, exactly where AI would come and replace a bunch of labor and do. So people are surprised today. People are also surprised by the financial system that they live in because they're measuring the system from the system. We have been on, if you measure on a log scale, an exponential pattern, technology has been moving at the exact same log rate for over 50 years.
Right.
Exact same. Why it was so easy to predict exactly where we'd be right now and exactly how much debt would be needed and manipulation of money to fill the hole is because I was just using a log scale and everybody else was looking at linear. So what's happening is people are watching a frame of a movie, and then instead of how the movie ends, instead of the entire movie. And they're really confused by the frame of the movie because things are happening so fast. And that frame of the movie today, oh my God, AI is going to replace all labor tomorrow. And then it's going to move. By the way, the next frame of the movie merges it with machines. And a friend of mine runs a company that is a leading company in this. Many don't know it, but there's actually robots right now in stores in Vancouver, not doing single purpose items, general purpose robots that you could give a command that say, operate this store to the best you can. So it'll unload a truck. It'll then do stock a shelf. Then it'll go up and do the cashier work. It'll do all of this stuff, not a job, all jobs. In a year or two, it'll be better than all humans at that, all of it.
I mean, I know Amazon today is employing 500,000 robots, and they do the job of 2 million humans, and surely that trend is going to continue. So that's a very interesting point, actually, that the technology is increasing at a consistent rate of change, but that rate of change is itself exponential.
Yeah, So the paper folding analogy I gave in my book.
Please tell the audience, because that's a great one.
Yeah, so I've asked this to tens of thousands of people in audiences, and people get the same answer all the time. But if you fold a piece of paper on itself 50 times, now you can only fold it 7. But if you imagine you could keep folding a piece of paper on itself 50 times, how thick is the piece of paper on fold 50? And when I ask that question all over the world, I get about an inch, right? Sometimes people say 2 inches. Very rarely people say the ceiling. That piece of paper would reach from here to the sun. Now, that's a long way.
Yes.
And why? But more important in that is when people finally understand that answer, they think, okay, it's a parlor trick. And if they couldn't get that answer, then they also can't really easily. Then they can't also get how an exponential pattern like Moore's law or AI is moving at this same rate. And the steps today are way bigger. So every year and a half, if you think about where we are with AI today, and now we're on, if effectively use that fold analogy, and we're on fold 34, moving to fold 35, the steps are a lot bigger than fold 2 to 3 or 4 to 5. Now,
well, so to give you an example, in the paper analogy, fold 49 is only halfway to the sun.
Exactly.
And 50, it's enormous absolute change, but the rate of change has been consistent throughout.
Exactly.
But the problem is we've got a financial system which is based on more debt, and then you need to create more debt in order to pay the interest on the existing debt. So what happens when you combine this consistent rate of change on technology, which is, from our point of view, accelerating very fast, with a financial system which must always see growth? So you've got these powerful deflationary trends with a financial system which must have inflation.
Yeah, you hear every politician, we need more jobs, we need more growth, we need more. And so no matter what we're going to do, it doesn't matter what politician, what side of the aisle, much of the money to run economies now doesn't come through taxes. It comes through a hidden theft that you have no vote on. So underneath that, so what that means is all the entire political structure on top of it is just theater, because all of it needs to be, to service the debt, has to have money manipulated at an exponential rate. And it just, who gets that money, who decides who gets the money is what you're talking about. And you have no vote in that. You have zero vote in it. So what ends up happening is eventually laws, you centralize everything. You lose your individual rights and freedoms. It's just a natural part because money is superordinate to laws. Who has the money can fight the laws, change the laws, put their justice in, change that over time. And we continually vote in a system thinking that there is change from within the system when we only make that system stronger. And ask yourself this really simple question, or have the audience, any single person in the audience, ask this. If a politician came to you and said, listen, your real wages are going to go up next year, but your income is going to go down, and your house prices are going to come down, and all of these prices are going to come down because we're going to live with an economic system based on truth, you'd laugh that person out. You don't want to hear that. You want to hear there's a free lunch. And so if our selfish nature can't see that, how could we change that from the very system that we're voting for? And what you'll see is why societies break, and why typically you go to war at the end of these, to be able to try to fix a system problem that is unfixable from the system.
And what happens if this system plays out? What happens to politics and distribution of wealth, and what happens to all of this?
It's so today go back to that Keynes thing when he's talking about 10 hours a week and having more than we have today. He's talking about the global average. So today, what it looks different. There's 100 million, 50 million people that are preying on all the other 7.9 billion people that are doing. So inflation is wage deflation. Right? It's the opposite side of the coin. So when a laborer in Ghana or somewhere, it digs up cobalt and they work for all day for $1, that is what powers your life here. And it wouldn't work because you wouldn't buy the electric car that requires that if it had a different cost. So that essentially stealing from other people's productivity all over the world gets worse and worse and worse. And that's why, in the existing system, and it has to, and that centralization of a function pits countries against countries. And it's way easier to convince your population that it's somebody else's fault outside your borders. First, you divide your own population and you say, I'll fix it. Right? I'm a hero. I'm going to fix it against your counterpart in your country. And you divide your own nation. Once you have power, because you can't solve it there, you need to create another war and another enemy in a different region to be able to
so then there needs to be a constant them versus us narrative perpetuated all the time, internally, externally.
Yeah. You know, I wrote a chapter about us versus them in the book because you could see what was going to happen. Again, I wrote the book primarily because I looked forward and played the movie forward and what the movie would look like. I could see all of the checkpoints, what would happen. And I looked at my young kids, and I said, what world will they grow up in?
So you described how the technological process is predictable and you can see the way it's going. And on the other side, we've got this incompatible financial system, which is coming in from the other side. Yeah. I suppose that is also pretty predictable because you can see the rate of growth in the debt. Have you thought much about where these two clash and they become completely, well, I mean, they're incompatible now, but when do they break, when they push up against each other?
So it's not the same break. So people are trying to, when you're measuring essentially the human body, when you're measuring weather, when you're measuring an economy, you can't look at most prognostics or anyone on TV would tell you the thing. Here it is. Here's the reason. Everything else. You can't do that. It looks like chaos theory.
Yeah.
And small things lead to big changes. And so for me to say the date and exactly what happens, I would just be adding to that. And I would encourage people not to look like that. It's actually like this. It's asking which snowflake causes the avalanche.
I think you've given an example in the past of an experiment where you drop grains of sand onto a bowl, and at a certain point the thing collapses, but it's not predictable which grain of sand is the one that does it. Although if we were to apply this to a political system, there are going to be people who correctly predict which grain of sand because there's enough people making predictions. So when you rewind the clock, it's going to look like somebody had a process for working this all out, but actually you can't predict when the system becomes unstable.
Exactly. Now think about, and this is why. So let's look at human nature in what's happening today. So Venezuela or Argentina, they have a 100%, 114% inflation rate currently. So that means the same thing that's happening in the US or UK or Canada with our 8 or 10% inflation rate is happening there at 10 times the inflation rate. And so there is an open monetary network that every single person could move over called Bitcoin that is unstoppable by the system, where they could save their wealth and their time in something fixed. And essentially they could measure, because it's a fixed unit, they could measure prices falling to the price to the marginal cost of production through Bitcoin, where you couldn't measure that in the existing system. So there's something that offers every person on the planet a way out of the existing system where they don't have to pay back the $400 trillion of debt or be any part of that risk of that system. But why are 95%, 96% of the people in that country, why are they still clinging to hope inside the existing system? And what you'll see is how much power that exerts over us. And so those people have just been wiped out. Their savings, they could have saved their entire life, and it's gone, all of it. And now what's happened versus the rest of the world, their labor has just gotten way cheaper versus the rest of the world. So money will race in to take advantage of their cheap labor, and they'll start again. And a whole bunch of people will be wiped out continually. Well, they could have been saved. Well, they could have just moved their time into a new system, and that's open to anybody in the world. So, well, human nature is such a powerful force inside our existing systems, and we give our existing systems strength by doing that. Like, think of what ends up happening. Look at the pictures in Venezuela and Argentina. People marching on the street, breaking windows, fighting, and then they go home, and where does the money come to fix all that stuff? And what you'll see is you actually strengthen the existing system against you.
I've often used that famous image of Weimar Germany, of the guy pushing his salary home in a wheelbarrow. And the thing that I've always found really remarkable about that image is not the fact that he's having to push his salary home in a wheelbarrow, because that is the product of inflation when it gets to its logical endpoint. The thing I find remarkable is that he's going through the effort of still pushing the wheelbarrow. He still believes in that system, and he's still willing to buy into it at that point. He's not saying, get me out of this, go to gold, which would have been the option at the time. So why do you feel that Bitcoin is the right answer as opposed to gold?
So for me, and because gold has tried to solve these problems, you couldn't actually solve them. Today, fighting a war to gain the gold back, good luck, right? The technology to fight the wars look like proxy wars or a destruction of our planet. They just go on forever. To be able to go and to kind of get the gold back or have enough, gold won't be used in this. Now, I want to be careful. I don't want to say that like that. So I think in probabilities. So gold might, so there's a potential that gold is used as a transition step to what we're talking about. And gold could be revalued a lot higher on the way through. So I'm not against gold. I'm just, it has inferior properties to Bitcoin in where we're going. Essentially, it's always been able to be it gets centralized, and that centralization changed its risk profile because of that. And so you're not going to take your gold bar and shave it off for for an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
And so, and if you have a bunch of gold and you're trying to get through an airport, it might be confiscated. So you're still locked within the country that your domain is, and you can't get out. Bitcoin has so many different unique and superior properties than that. It makes it a better asset. More importantly, is this: if you had a system change like we're talking about, and the powers that be, and I'm not saying this is mostly not bad people, it's mostly a system reinforcing itself, but the powers that be at the top of that system essentially didn't work. They told you other people what to do, and they created laws and rules that told different people what to do, and so Bitcoin changed the rules that essentially the labor or the productivity, people with productivity gained more Bitcoin, because and instead of the rent seekers. Then you could imagine a massive fight in a system that was 10,000 times bigger than Bitcoin, and everything in its power to try to kill it. You could imagine what would happen if anybody knew what Bitcoin was. It was decentralized and secure. Then you would imagine that everything in its power would be try to kill it. And so 14 years later, it's just stronger and stronger and more decentralized and more secure. And so now, if somebody wants to read in depth on this, look at my website at jeffbooth.ca. And I wrote an article called "Finding Signal in a Noisy World." And I explain why Bitcoin is alone in this, no other altcoin, and what it would look like, both from the new system and from the system trying to attack it. And it explains from a physics principle why there is nothing even close to Bitcoin. It's a once in a lifetime type of invention or discovery. And I know that's hard to grasp. And some people would say, oh, sure, there has to be something else. If they did their work, like I've done my work at the depth of this, they would find what I'm saying is true. And so it would have to be that strong. It would have to be that decentralized and secure, because otherwise it would fail underneath an attack from unlimited money to try to kill it.
The pushback I always get is people say to me things like, the government won't allow it. But there's no corporate office you can send a cease and desist notice to. It's a protocol. It cannot be shut down. It's like when the record companies try to shut down the teenagers sharing music amongst each other. It wasn't possible.
Yeah, you're right. That's exactly it. It's impossible to get shut down because it moves. It's more decentralized. It's everywhere. It's a network. It's everywhere. Nobody knows that I run a node, right? That somebody else runs a node. My neighbor runs a node that protects. Like, these are everywhere in the world, and so it's literally impossible to shut down. Now, but think about the question in itself. That question that was just you said, because it's probably the number one question I get too. Governments will shut it down. Okay. Do you realize that there is no they? There's just we. Right. And so when you say this imaginary force that has control because you give it control, you also choose your outcome. You're literally one of those people in Venezuela or Argentina saying, I'm scared, and my fear is going to make the government give the government more control. When you have an open monetary network that is in your control today, or everybody's control, that nobody can shut down. And so, but that fear, that fear. So I would personally rather live in hope. And I'm an entrepreneur. I want to build a better future. I want to build a better future for myself, my family, the world I live in. And I would rather live in hope that I'm on a path doing that than fear and yelling at people on a path that I have no control in.
Yeah, I'm very much like you. I started probably more skeptical in it, but the more time that you invest in it, you start to knock out all of the other options, and it does sort of come back to that. But even putting that aside, it feels very much like the system that we have at the moment. It is controlled by people who as a product of the fact that they have control, have done extremely well in the existing system. They own a large proportion of the assets. And it feels like, especially in the US today, because of their dollar status, is they are willing to destroy the potential for an innovation-based future, for an alternative structure, in order to preserve the system that they have at the moment. And we're seeing this with sort of the Operation Choke Point 2.0, which is attempting to clamp down. It feels like the US is starting to, inch by inch, bring capital controls back, locking the Americans into.
When I said laws change, they have to. So you have a system based on theft, and there is no other word for it. That word might sound harsh, but you didn't vote for more monetary units to go up, and every time more monetary units are created, everything in your life gets more scarce, and you have to work harder and harder to try to get. So abundance in money creates scarcity everywhere. Scarcity in money creates abundance. It's literally that simple.
What's that stat you give? It's about the amount of debt that had to be created 20 years ago in order to generate a certain amount of GDP, and basically it's just trailing off. Remind me of that.
Yeah, so in my book, I went through kind of how both systems would operate against each other, and in the preceding 20 years to 2019, my book. So what I wanted to see if there was a smoking gun that would essentially define that my thesis was correct. Right. So my thesis was technology should be driving prices down, and that debt must be, or debt and then manipulation of money must be expanding at exactly the offsetting rate to that technology to be able to see it. And if you looked within one country, you wouldn't see it. It would feel like a shell game, right, to all other countries. So you wouldn't see all the movements. But if you looked at all countries versus all GDP, you might see it. So I did some research, and I found that in the preceding 20 years, the debt had grown $185 trillion. $185 trillion. Now remember, $1 trillion, if you paid back $1 a second, would take about 32,000 years to pay back. Yeah. So one trillion.
Oh, I just accept that I cannot get my head around a trillion. A billion I can maybe do, but a trillion, not a chance.
But again, these large numbers, same thing with exponentials, break your brain. So you think it's safe. So $185 trillion of new debt to grow economies globally by 46 trillion. So essentially 4 to 1 new debt and monetary easing to grow economies by for every $4, $1. Yeah. And so just think about that if you had to do that personally. Because you do have to do that personally.
So if I had to go to the bank and say I'm going to borrow this amount of money to make a quarter of it,
exactly, to make a quarter of it, and then that was the entire rate, right? Not the taxed rate. So that was the entire and you had to do it, and the next year it had to get worse, and the next year it had to get worse, and the next year it had to get worse.
So over time, it's not even 4 for 1; it goes down. It's 5 to 1, 6 to 1,
5 to 1, 6 to 1, 8 to 1. It has to be, and that's why you knew. In response, you knew there would be something. The market started breaking, by the way, long before COVID. The repo rate spiked way before COVID. You knew there had to be something to inspire a massive liquidity globally. There had to be, because the system would have unwound at that time.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.